Jerome Butler was 38 years old, a master electrician who built his contracting business from nothing, owned his home outright, and had never once given his wife a reason to doubt him. For 8 years he showed up, quietly, completely, without asking for applause. Then one evening he came home early from a cancelled job and found a printed email on his nightstand that his wife had forgotten to hide. 14 months. Another man. A secret savings account she'd been filling for 9 months, while Jerome's paychecks kept the lights on and the mortgage current. She had already paid a divorce attorney's retainer. 2 days after Jerome used their joint card to book a romantic anniversary trip to Savannah she never intended to take. 4 days later, she sat across from him with packed suitcases and said the words she'd clearly rehearsed. "Jerome, I don't need you." He walked her to the door, helped load her bags, and said, "Drive safe." What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Jerome was already 3 steps ahead, and she would find out exactly what that meant. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Jerome Butler's day began like all his others, at 5:15 a.m., before the sun had any thoughts of rising. The quiet of pre-dawn settled around him as he moved through his morning routine with practiced efficiency. His work boots barely made a sound on the hardwood floors he'd refinished himself last summer. The same floors Adrienne had said needed warming up. The coffee maker hummed to life, filling the kitchen with its familiar aroma. Jerome settled at the solid oak table, another piece of this home he'd carefully chosen and maintained over their 8 years of marriage. Spread before him were 3 contracts for upcoming jobs: a rewiring project for a local church, a full electrical installation for a new restaurant downtown, and a bid proposal for a commercial development that could take Butler Electric to the next level. His calloused fingers traced the lines of each document as he reviewed the details. Years of working with his hands had taught him the value of thoroughness. Every wire, every connection, every detail mattered. It was how he'd built his business from a one-man operation into a respected name in Atlanta's working-class suburbs. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Adrienne's arrival. She appeared in the doorway, already dressed for her marketing job at the real estate firm, her clothes carefully chosen and professional. Jerome looked up, offering a smile that wasn't quite returned. "Morning," she said, moving past him to the coffee maker. Her voice was pleasant enough, but held the same distance that had become their new normal. "Made a fresh pot," Jerome replied, watching as she poured her coffee into the travel mug she'd started using recently. One he didn't recognize. "Thanks." She added cream and sugar, her movements efficient and detached, as if he were simply part of the kitchen furniture. 4 months ago, she would have at least rested a hand on his shoulder as she passed. 4 months ago, their mornings had different rhythms. Jerome returned to his contracts, but his attention wasn't fully on the papers anymore. He noticed how Adrienne checked her phone 3 times while preparing her breakfast. A yogurt parfait she barely touched. She'd been going out more lately. Happy hours with coworkers that stretched later and later. Last week, she hadn't made it home until after 10. "Big presentation today?" he asked, trying to bridge the growing silence between them. "Mm-hmm," she responded, gathering her things. "Might be another late one. Don't wait up." Jerome nodded, keeping his face neutral. "I booked that trip to Savannah," he said carefully, "for our anniversary next month. Got us that bed and breakfast you mentioned wanting to try." Something flickered across Adrienne's face, too quick to read. "Oh, right, thanks." She glanced at her watch. "I should go. Traffic's going to be terrible." After she left, Jerome stood to refill his coffee. He needed to check on something in the home office anyway, a receipt for materials he'd filed last week. The office was technically shared space, though lately it felt like everything else, separated by an invisible line. That's when he saw it. Behind a stack of design magazines Adrienne kept on her desk, partially hidden by books about market analysis and brand development, was a cell phone he'd never seen before. It wasn't her usual iPhone with the cracked case she'd been meaning to replace. This was newer, slimmer, plugged into a charger that snaked behind the desk. Jerome stood very still, coffee forgotten in his hand. 8 years of marriage had taught him his wife's habits, her belongings, the rhythm of their shared life. This phone was new information. Important information. He didn't touch it, didn't move the books, didn't even step closer to see the brand or model. Instead, he retrieved the receipt he'd come for and returned to the kitchen, his movements as measured as they'd been when he woke up. Settling back at the table, Jerome stared out the kitchen window at their backyard. The deck he'd built 3 summers ago needed staining again. The flower beds he'd installed when they first moved in were starting to show early spring growth. Everything in view was something he'd built, maintained, or improved with his own hands. The morning light was growing stronger now, casting long shadows across the yard. Jerome sat perfectly still, his coffee cooling beside the contracts that still needed his attention. His face remained calm, but something had shifted in his dark eyes, a new awareness, not yet fully formed but impossible to ignore. He picked up his pen and returned to the contracts. He had a 12-hour day ahead of him. There were crews to manage, materials to order, clients to meet. The work, as always, would be done right. The sudden permit delay wasn't something Jerome had planned for, but 18 years in contracting had taught him that some things were beyond control. He pulled into his driveway at 2:47 p.m., hours before his usual return time. Adrienne's silver Lexus, the one she'd insisted on leasing last year, was nowhere in sight. The house felt different in the middle of the afternoon, quieter. The sunlight streaming through the windows he'd replaced himself cast unfamiliar shadows across the hardwood floors. Jerome moved through the rooms with the steady pace that defined everything he did, his work boots making soft thuds against the floor. In the kitchen, a coffee mug sat unwashed in the sink. Not his. He never left dishes. A half-eaten yogurt container beside it. The spoon still inside. Little signs of Adrienne's rushed morning departure, the kind of details he'd started noticing more lately. He headed upstairs to change out of his work clothes, his mind already on the estimates he could get ahead on with this unexpected free time. The bedroom door was partially open, afternoon light spilling across their queen-size bed. Another piece of furniture they'd chosen together, back when together meant something different. As he shrugged off his heavy work jacket, something caught his eye on Adrienne's nightstand. Beneath the novel she'd been reading for the past 3 weeks, he hadn't seen her turn a single page, was a partially concealed piece of paper. The corner peeking out had what looked like a corporate letterhead. Jerome stood perfectly still for a moment, that same stillness that had served him well through every crisis he'd ever faced. Then, with deliberate care, he reached for the paper. It was an email, printed on standard office paper. The header showed it had been sent yesterday afternoon, from Victor.Ashford, Ashford Realty, Dom, to Adrienne.Butler, AshfordRealty.com. Subject, next steps. Jerome read each word with the same attention he gave to electrical schematics. The language was casual, intimate, the tone of someone who knew they were writing to a lover, not a colleague. Victor mentioned how much he'd enjoyed their weekend getaway last month, and how he couldn't wait to have more than stolen moments. Last month, Charlotte, where Adrienne had supposedly visited her college roommate, Jennifer. But it was the next paragraph that made Jerome's trained hands, capable of the most delicate electrical work, go completely still. I talked to my guy about the paperwork yesterday. Once you handle your end, we can move forward with everything we discussed. I know this transition period is difficult, but you're handling it perfectly. Soon, we won't have to hide anything. Jerome read it again. Then, once more. Each word burned itself into his memory with precise clarity. With the same careful movements he used when handling live wires, he folded the email into perfect thirds and slipped it into his work jacket pocket. He sat on the edge of the bed, their bed, and remained there, motionless, for exactly 17 minutes. Anyone watching might have mistaken his stillness for shock or grief. They would have been wrong. Behind his eyes, calculations were forming, connections being made, a blueprint taking shape. The sound of Adrienne's car pulling into the driveway at 6:15 p.m. found Jerome in the kitchen, calmly reheating the pot roast he'd made in the slow cooker 2 days ago. The same pot roast she'd barely touched at dinner. "You're home early," Adrienne said, surprise coloring her voice as she set her purse down on the counter. "Permit delay on the Thompson project," Jerome replied, his voice warm and even. "How was your day?" "Oh, you know. Busy." She ran a hand through her hair. A nervous gesture he'd known for 8 years. Had happy hour with some people from work. Should have texted. "That's good," Jerome said, stirring the pot roast. "You need to decompress. Want some dinner? There's plenty." Something flickered across Adrienne's face. Uncertainty, maybe concern. But it vanished when Jerome smiled at her. The same smile he'd given her that morning. The same smile he'd given her for 8 years. "I'll have a little," she said, relaxing visibly. "Let me change first." Later that night, after Adrienne had gone to bed claiming a headache, Jerome sat at the kitchen table. The house was dark except for the single light above him. The folded email lay on the table's worn surface, innocent-looking despite the weight of its contents. He picked up his phone and typed a single message to his brother Neil. "I need your help. Call me in the morning." The morning air was crisp as Jerome sat in his work truck, parked at the empty construction site. His crew wouldn't arrive for another 30 minutes. The dashboard clock read 6:43 a.m. He pulled out his phone and called Neil. His brother answered on the second ring. "Kind of early for a social call." "Need your expertise," Jerome said, his voice steady. He explained everything. The hidden phone behind the books, the printed email, the weekend in Charlotte that wasn't Charlotte. Neil listened without interruption, the way he'd been trained to do in the army. When Jerome finished, Neil was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Don't touch anything. Don't change anything. Give me 72 hours. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking you're smart enough to call me instead of confronting her. Let me work. Go home tonight and act normal. Actually, act better than normal." Jerome nodded, though Neil couldn't see it. "I hear you." The next 3 days were a masterclass in controlled performance. Jerome brought home yellow roses on Tuesday evening. "Just because," he said when Adrienne looked surprised. He suggested trying that new Thai place she'd mentioned last month. He was present, attentive, and completely unreadable. At work, he ran his crews with the same precise attention he always had. No one would have guessed anything was wrong. Deshawn, his best friend since childhood and lead foreman, noticed Jerome checking his phone more often, but knew better than to ask. Neil's updates came in careful, measured texts. Day 1. Found the accounts. More than one. Give me time. Day 2. Got access to the firm's public records. You're going to want to sit down for this. Day 3. Meet me. Usual spot. 4 p.m. The usual spot was a quiet coffee shop near Neil's office. Jerome arrived to find his brother already there, a thick manila envelope on the table. Neil's expression was carefully neutral, his investigation face. "It's not good," Neil said, without preamble. "The affair with Victor Ashford. It's been going on 14 months, not weeks. I've got hotel receipts, restaurant charges, a pattern of meetings disguised as work events." Jerome's hands remained steady around his coffee cup. "Go on." "She opened a personal savings account 9 months ago. No joint access. Been making irregular deposits, $200 here, $800 there. Totals just over $14,000 now. Some of those transfers came directly from your household account. Jerome absorbed this, his expression unchanged. Neil continued, each word measured. 3 weeks ago, she had a consultation with a divorce attorney. Paid a retainer. Here's the kicker. The payment went through 2 days after you booked that Savannah trip. Jerome sat perfectly still, processing the timeline. The careful dismantling of their life together had been happening right under his nose, while he was still building, still investing, still planning their future. I've got it all documented, Neil added, sliding the envelope across the table. Names, dates, account numbers. Everything a good attorney would need. Jerome took the envelope without opening it. Thank you. What's your next move? Already made it. Got a referral from your office for Sarah Chen, best divorce attorney in 3 counties. Neil nodded approvingly. Jerome stood, envelope in hand, and headed to his truck. In the parking lot, he reviewed the findings one more time. The retainer payment detail hit him hardest. She'd let him book their anniversary trip, knowing she was already planning her exit. He forwarded that specific detail to Sarah Chen, with one line. Get everything ready. That Friday, Jerome pulled into his driveway at his usual time. Something felt different before he even opened the door. Inside, he found Adrienne sitting at their kitchen table, 2 packed suitcases beside her. Her face was composed, rehearsed. She delivered her speech with practiced precision. They wanted different things. She'd been unhappy. She needed more from life. She deserved more. She was sorry, but she had to do this for herself. Jerome listened without interruption, just as he had that morning in his truck with Neil. Then she said it. The words that would echo, Jerome, I love you, but I don't need you. I can do this on my own. Jerome nodded slowly. Okay, Adrienne. She blinked, thrown by his calmness. He could see her struggling to adjust her script. Without waiting for more, Jerome stood and picked up one of her suitcases. Let me help you with these. They walked to her car in silence. He loaded the bags carefully into her trunk, the same way he handled everything, with purpose and precision. Drive safe, he said, stepping back from the car. Adrienne sat there for a full minute, hands on the steering wheel, before finally pulling away. Jerome watched until her taillights disappeared around the corner. Inside, he went straight to his laptop and picked up his phone. Sarah Chen answered immediately. It's Jerome Butler. She just left. Let's file first. The morning light filtered through the diner's clouded windows as Jerome stirred his coffee. It was 6:30 a.m., and the place was mostly empty, except for a few contractors grabbing breakfast before their shifts. Neil sat across from him, a thick manila folder placed carefully between their coffee cups. You're not going to like what I found, Neil said, opening the folder with practiced precision. But you need to know everything. Jerome nodded, his face composed. He hadn't slept much, but his eyes were clear and focused. Let's start with Victor Ashford, Neil continued, pulling out several documents. This isn't his first time doing this. I found a pattern going back 3 years at the firm. He targets married women specifically, usually ones in marketing or admin roles, positions where he has authority, but not direct supervision. Jerome took a slow sip of his coffee, letting the information settle. 2 years ago, there was an HR complaint that got buried. Similar situation. Married woman, promises of advancement, hints about a better life. The complaint disappeared, but the woman transferred to another office suddenly. 3 months later, same pattern with someone else. Neil laid out printed emails and meeting records, carefully redacted, but clear enough. He's not in love with Adrienne, Jerome. He's managing her. It's a strategy he's perfected. Show interest, hint at opportunities, create distance between the target and their spouse. Then, make promises about the future, always just vague enough to maintain deniability. Jerome's hands remained steady around his coffee cup. Tell me about his marriage. That's where it gets interesting, Neil said, pulling out another document. He's still very much married. His wife comes from old Atlanta money. The marriage is more of a business arrangement at this point, but it's what maintains his lifestyle. The downtown condo where Adrian's staying? It's actually owned by his wife's family trust. Jerome absorbed this detail, thinking about Adrian walking into that space, thinking it represented her future. Your attorney filed the divorce petition yesterday, Neil continued. The financial subpoenas went out this morning. That $14,000 account is already on record. Adrian's lawyer tried to frame it as personal savings, but Sarah Chen shut that down fast. We've got bank records showing transfers directly from your joint household account, the one you've been funding solo for the past 3 years, while Adrian's paychecks went elsewhere. Jerome nodded slowly. She was building her exit ramp while I paid for everything. Exactly, Neil confirmed. This wasn't just unhappiness, Jerome. This was calculated. She was using your stability to finance her escape plan. The diner had started filling up with the morning crowd. A waitress topped off their coffees, and Jerome waited until she moved away before speaking. Keep watching, he said quietly. I want to know everything. Where she goes, who she talks to, what story she's telling people. Already on it, Neil assured him. I've got someone monitoring the firm's internal communications. Victor's not as careful as he thinks he is. Jerome finished his coffee and checked his phone. He had a crew waiting at a job site across town. Send everything to Sarah. I want it all documented. That evening, Jerome met Deshawn at their usual spot, a small bar where they'd been watching games since they were old enough to drink. He told him a partial version, leaving out the details about Victor's pattern and the financial records. Deshawn's reaction was immediate. Man, you need to confront her now. Call her out on all of it. Jerome shook his head, his voice calm. Not yet. I want everything before she knows I have anything. You're too cool about this, Deshawn protested. She's out there living in some rich man's condo while you're just… Waiting? I'm not waiting, Jerome corrected. I'm building. Later that night, Jerome sat on his back deck, the one he'd constructed himself 2 summers ago, every board and nail placed with purpose. The night air was cool, and the neighborhood was quiet. His dinner plate sat empty beside him. He wasn't angry. Anger required uncertainty, and Jerome was past that now. What he felt was focus, clean and sharp as a newly leveled beam. Every revelation from Neil, every document in Sarah Chen's growing file, was another piece of framework being set into place. The deck creaked softly under his chair as he leaned back, looking up at the stars, the same stars he and Adrian used to watch together, back when he thought silence meant peace instead of preparation. Jerome was reviewing material orders in his truck when his phone buzzed. The number wasn't saved, but he recognized it immediately. Patricia Cole, Adrian's mother. He took a deep breath before answering. Jerome? Patricia's voice was hesitant but clear. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. No interruption, Mrs. Cole. What can I do for you? I'd like to meet with you, if you're willing. Not about getting you and Adrian back together, she added quickly. Just, there are things you should know. Jerome checked his schedule. I can meet you at 1. There's a coffee shop called Rosemary's near my office. I know the place. Thank you, Jerome. The coffee shop was quiet when Jerome arrived. Patricia was already there, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. She looked older than he remembered, the lines around her eyes deeper. She stood when she saw him, smoothing her skirt with nervous hands. Thank you for coming, she said, as Jerome sat down. A waitress approached, and he ordered black coffee. I want you to know, Patricia began, once they were alone, that I'm deeply ashamed of how Adrian has handled this. You deserved better than what she's done. Jerome nodded, waiting. I always respected you, Jerome. From the first time Adrian brought you home. You were solid, real, the kind of man I hoped she'd find. Patricia's fingers tightened around her mug. I watched you build your business from nothing. I saw how you treated my daughter. And I saw—" She paused, collecting herself. "I saw how she started changing this past year." The waitress brought Jerome's coffee. He added nothing to it, just held it, letting its warmth ground him. "There's something specific I need to tell you," Patricia continued. 6 months ago, Adrienne came over for Sunday dinner. We were in the kitchen, and she started talking about your marriage. She told me—" Patricia's voice caught slightly. "She told me that you and she were basically separated in all but name, that you hadn't been a real couple for years, that you knew it too, and just didn't want to admit it." Jerome's face remained neutral, but something shifted behind his eyes. He understood exactly what this meant. "I didn't challenge her then," Patricia admitted. "I wish I had. But I'm telling you now because you need to know. She was building this story long before she left. She was—" Patricia searched for the right words. "Rewriting our marriage," Jerome finished quietly. "Making me into someone who failed her, so leaving wouldn't feel like betrayal." "Yes," Patricia said, relief in her voice at his understanding. "Exactly that. She told other people too. Her cousin Maya, her friend Rachel. Always the same story. That you were already essentially separated. That everyone could see it but you." Jerome took a slow sip of his coffee, processing. This wasn't just about the money she'd hidden or the affair with Victor. This was deeper. A systematic dismantling of their shared reality. A poison dropped carefully into conversations months before she made her move. "I'm so sorry, Jerome," Patricia said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I should have seen what she was doing. I should have said something." "Mrs. Cole," Jerome said gently, "you have nothing to apologize for. Adrienne is a grown woman who made her choices. You're here now, telling me the truth. That matters." They talked a while longer, Patricia sharing other small details, comments Adrienne had made about Victor, things she'd said about the future she thought she was stepping into. Jerome listened carefully, filing away each piece. When they parted, Patricia hugged him briefly. "You're a good man, Jerome Butler. Don't let what she did change that." In his truck, Jerome called Neil immediately. "My mother-in-law just gave us something important," he said, relaying Patricia's revelation. 6 months of groundwork, Neil. She was poisoning the well long before she left. "I'll document everything," Neil assured him. "This strengthens our case, shows premeditation in her financial conduct. Sarah can use this." Jerome drove home slowly, thinking about all the rooms in his house where Adrienne had stood, telling herself stories about their marriage while he worked, and built, and planned their future. He parked in the driveway and walked through each space. The kitchen where they'd shared thousands of meals, the living room where they'd watched movies on Sunday afternoons, the bedroom where distance had grown like a shadow. Finally, he went to the garage. In the corner stood his neglected workbench, a custom piece he'd been designing for 2 years but never finished. He rolled up his sleeves, turned on the shop light, and began measuring wood. The familiar smell of sawdust filled the air as he worked, letting the rhythm of careful construction wash everything else away. Hours passed. The moon rose. Jerome worked until his hands were tired and his mind was quiet. When he finally went inside, he slept without dreaming. Jerome's truck rumbled at a stoplight when Neil's name flashed on his phone display. He answered through the Bluetooth speaker, expecting their usual morning check-in. "You need to pull over for this one," Neil said without preamble. Jerome guided his truck into an empty church parking lot, killed the engine, and switched to handheld. "Go ahead." Victor Ashford's house of cards just collapsed. Neil's voice had the precise tone he used when delivering confirmed intelligence. His wife, Sandra, filed for divorce yesterday morning. But that's just the beginning. Jerome settled back in his seat, watching morning traffic pass on the main road. "Tell me." Sandra's attorney is aggressive, high-powered family law specialist who specializes in hidden asset cases. They've already filed for emergency injunctive relief to freeze accounts. During initial discovery, they found something interesting. A secondary LLC Victor's been using to redirect firm commissions. We're talking serious money, Jerome. Off-books transactions dating back 3 years. How much? North of 7 figures. But here's where it gets better. The State Real Estate Licensing Board got wind of it. They've opened a formal inquiry into his license and business practices. The firm is in damage control mode. Jerome absorbed this, thinking about Adrienne sitting in Victor's downtown condo, planning her new life around his projected wealth. What else? 2 women from the firm filed HR complaints this morning. Neither one is Adrienne, Neil added quickly. Similar pattern. He approached them while they were married, promised career advancement, suggested their husbands were holding them back. One has documented emails going back 14 months. Same timeline as Adrienne, Jerome noted. Exactly. HR called Adrienne in for a meeting first thing today. Standard procedure when there's an investigation involving a senior partner and a subordinate who's known to be involved. Jerome could picture it. Adrienne, in her carefully chosen office wear, sitting across from HR representatives who suddenly viewed her not as an ambitious professional, but as a liability to be managed. Her position? He asked. Not terminated yet, but compromised. They're documenting everything, building a paper trail. Victor's already distancing himself, canceled their standing lunch meetings, stopped including her in client dinners. All those introductions he promised to his social circle? Gone quiet. Jerome remembered Adrienne's words, "I don't need you." He wondered how those words tasted now, sitting alone in Victor's increasingly empty promises. "There's more," Neil continued. Victor asked her to move out of the condo yesterday. His attorney advised clearing any personal connections while they handle the licensing investigation. She's at the extended stay on Hammond Drive. Jerome knew the place. Clean, but basic. Nothing like the lifestyle Victor had dangled. How's she paying for it? Credit cards, from what I can see. Her salary won't cover it long term. Speaking of financial matters, Neil's tone shifted. How'd the Decatur bid meeting go? For the first time that morning, Jerome smiled slightly. Final walkthrough is Thursday. Contracts ready for signatures. The mixed-use development? Jerome, that's a 7-figure job. 8, Jerome corrected quietly. Full electrical design build for all 3 buildings, plus infrastructure. I've been working on that bid package for 4 months. While she thought you were just running service calls, Neil said with satisfaction, Butler Electric's about to level up. Need to hire 2 more journeymen just to handle the base load, Jerome confirmed. Looking at an office manager, too. Can't run everything from my truck anymore. They talked logistics for a few more minutes before ending the call. Jerome sat in the church parking lot, watching the morning sun climb higher. He thought about Adrienne in her hotel room, watching her carefully constructed future dissolve. He thought about Victor, facing investigations that would strip away his professional armor. He thought about his own quiet work, the hours reviewing plans, refining numbers, building relationships with developers who respected competence over flash. The following afternoon, Jerome sat at his newly installed office desk, real cherry wood, selected and paid for with the same care he brought to everything. The Decatur contract lay before him, 57 pages of specifications, timelines, and terms. He signed each flagged page with a steady hand, initials clear and confident. Setting the pen down, he allowed himself exactly 1 moment to feel the satisfaction of earned success. Then he picked up his phone and called his crew foreman. They had work to schedule, teams to organize, and a future to build. Unlike the one Adrienne chased, this one was founded on something real. Jerome sat across from his attorney, Richard Martinez, in the well-appointed downtown office. Between them, spread across the polished conference table, lay the complete case file, 3 months of meticulous documentation organized in crisp blue folders. The financial evidence alone is compelling, Martinez said, tapping the leftmost folder. Hidden accounts, diverted household funds, unauthorized transfers. Then we have the timeline. 14 months of documented infidelity, 9 months of systematic financial deception, and that retainer payment on your joint card 2 days after you booked the Savannah trip. He leaned back, confident. We're positioned for a very favorable settlement. Jerome nodded, studying the materials. I want a mediated sit-down. All parties present, not just attorneys. Martinez frowned. That's not advisable, Jerome. We have leverage. Why give them face-to-face opportunities to manipulate the narrative? Because I want her to hear it directly from me, Jerome said simply. Every detail, every date, every decision she made while I was building our life. I want her mother there too. Patricia Cole? Martinez shuffled through his notes. The witness to your wife's pre-separation narrative manipulation? Yes. Adrienne needs to understand that every false story she told is documented, that her mother's testimony exists, that there's nowhere left to hide. Martinez studied his client carefully. Most men in Jerome's position came in radiating anger or pain. Jerome radiated clarity. You understand this gives them opportunities to provoke emotional responses, to try to paint you as aggressive or unstable. Jerome's slight smile didn't reach his eyes. They've been underestimating me for 14 months. Let them keep doing it one more day. After a moment, Martinez nodded. I'll arrange it, but I want to prep you thoroughly. No prep needed, Jerome interrupted quietly. I know what I'm doing. Leaving the office, Jerome made 3 calls from his truck. First, to Deshawn. It's time, he said simply. About damn time, Deshawn replied. You need anything? Just be ready to meet afterward, either to celebrate or commiserate. Man, knowing you, it'll be celebrating. Next, he called Neil. Bring everything tomorrow. Every document, every timeline, every piece of evidence. I want it all in that room. You sure about this approach? Neil asked. Completely. She needs to see it all laid out at once. No more hiding behind lawyers or distance. Finally, he called Patricia Cole. She answered on the second ring. Jerome? Is everything all right? Yes, ma'am. I'm requesting a mediated settlement conference tomorrow. I'd like you there as a witness to what you told me about Adrienne's statements before she left. Patricia was quiet for a moment. You're sure? Yes, ma'am. Your daughter needs to face the truth. All of it. What time? 9 a.m. Downtown offices. I'll be there, she said without hesitation. And Jerome? You're doing the right thing. That evening, Jerome moved through his house with deliberate calm. He laid out his charcoal suit, the one he wore to bid presentations, perfectly tailored. White shirt, navy tie, polished black Oxfords, everything precise, nothing flashy. In his home office, he reviewed the case file one final time, not rehearsing speeches. He didn't need them. Instead, he organized his thoughts with the same methodical care he brought to planning complex electrical systems. Every fact was a wire, every connection documented, every sequence mapped. He knew exactly how tomorrow would flow. The late summer evening was cooling when Jerome stepped out onto his back deck. The carpentry project he'd started days ago, a simple but elegant storage bench, waited for its final touches. He worked steadily, sanding the cedar to a perfect smoothness, checking each joint, applying the last coat of sealant. The physical work centered him, as it always had. When he finished, Jerome ran his hand across the completed surface. Like everything he built, it was exactly what it was supposed to be. Solid, functional, made to last. No shortcuts, no compromises, no pretense. Just honest work, done right. He cleaned his tools, stored them properly, and swept the deck clean. Inside, he set his alarm for 6 a.m., though he knew he wouldn't need it. His body had woken before dawn for so many years, it was simply natural now. In the quiet of his bedroom, Jerome folded his reading glasses and set them beside the novel he'd been working through. A history of electrical innovation in America. Tomorrow would settle everything, but tonight was for rest. The downtown mediation office occupied the 15th floor of a glass and steel high-rise. Jerome arrived 30 minutes early, parking his truck in the validated structure and taking the elevator up with unhurried confidence. His charcoal suit fit perfectly. He'd had it tailored last year for client presentations. The white shirt was crisp, the navy tie precisely knotted, his black Oxfords gleaming. The receptionist directed him to Conference Room C. Jerome thanked her and stepped inside. The room was well appointed but neutral. A long mahogany table, comfortable chairs, water service on a side credenza, city views through tinted windows. He poured himself water, set his briefcase beside his chair, and sat quietly, without reaching for his phone. Patricia Cole arrived next, dressed conservatively in a navy pantsuit. She nodded to Jerome and took a seat 2 chairs down. They didn't speak. Nothing needed to be said. Neil arrived shortly after, carrying a leather portfolio thick with documents. He sat up efficiently at Jerome's right hand, laying out key files in precise order. Martinez, Jerome's attorney, arrived 10 minutes before the scheduled start. He reviewed the document arrangement with approval, then briefed the mediator who would be facilitating. The mediator, a silver-haired woman named Judge Chen, took her position at the head of the table. At precisely 9 o'clock, Adrienne entered with her attorney, Robert Klein. She wore a cream-colored blazer over a black dress, her makeup perfect, her posture rehearsed. Then she saw Patricia. The slight falter in her step was visible only to those who knew to watch for it. She hadn't expected her mother here. "Mom!" Adrienne's voice carried a note of betrayal. "What are you doing here?" "Mrs. Cole is present at Mr. Butler's request," Martinez stated formally, "as a material witness to certain relevant conversations." Adrienne's jaw tightened. She took her seat across from Jerome, not meeting his eyes. Klein arranged his materials, projecting confidence he likely didn't feel given the thickness of Neil's portfolio. "Let's begin," Judge Chen said. "Mr. Klein, please present your client's position." Klein launched into their prepared opening. Reasonable division of marital assets, spousal support given Adrienne's career sacrifices during the marriage, either sale of the house or Jerome buying out Adrienne's equity stake. His tone suggested this was all very standard, very reasonable. Martinez let him finish completely. Then he opened the first blue folder. "Your Honor, we'll be presenting documented evidence of systematic financial deception during the marriage, including unauthorized diversion of marital funds and deliberate misrepresentation of the marital status to multiple parties. We'll begin with Exhibit A, 14 months of documented communication between Mrs. Butler and Victor Ashford, demonstrating an ongoing extramarital relationship that predates her separation by more than a year." Adrienne's hands tightened on her armrests as Martinez methodically laid out the timeline. The secret phone records, the hotel receipts, the Charlotte weekend that wasn't Charlotte. Neil had been thorough. Exhibit B, bank records showing a concealed personal savings account containing $14,000 in diverted marital funds, opened 9 months before separation without Mr. Butler's knowledge or consent. Klein tried to interject. Judge Chen silenced him with a raised hand, studying the documentation. And, finally, Exhibit C, proof that Mrs. Butler paid a $5,000 retainer to divorce counsel on September 15th using the couple's joint credit card. This was 2 days after Mr. Butler paid $2,800 for their anniversary trip to Savannah. Also documented here, using the same card. The room was very quiet. Adrienne's perfect makeup couldn't hide her pallor. Then Jerome spoke. His voice was steady, neither loud nor soft. "I'd like to address my wife directly, if the mediator permits." Judge Chen nodded. Jerome turned to face Adrienne fully. "For 14 months, you maintained a relationship with another man while I maintained our home. For 9 months, you diverted our household funds while I paid our bills. You told your mother, and others, that we were basically separated while I booked our anniversary trip. You paid a divorce attorney with our joint card 2 days after I paid for Savannah. He paused, letting each fact land with quiet weight. You constructed a story where I was failing you, where I knew it too, but wouldn't admit it. You told that story while I built our deck, while I refinished our floors, while I funded the life you were secretly planning to leave. Adrienne's eyes filled with tears. They spilled over, tracking mascara down her cheeks. "Mom," she whispered, turning to Patricia. "How could you tell him?" "Because it was true," Patricia said simply, "and because he deserved to know." Klein tried again to redirect. "Your Honor, this emotional manipulation—" "Objection noted," Martinez cut in. "Now let's discuss our terms." Jerome laid them out precisely. Sole ownership of the house, full protection of his business assets, return of the diverted marital funds, and a clean dissolution with no spousal support. His voice remained level, as if discussing an electrical bid. Klein leaned close to Adrienne, speaking urgently. Jerome knew what he was saying. If they didn't accept, every document would become public record in a contested trial. Every timeline, every receipt, every lie. The divorce decree arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to Jerome's office. The manila envelope felt lighter than the weight of its contents should suggest. He opened it carefully, reviewed each page once with the same attention he gave electrical blueprints, then placed it in his briefcase to file at home later. That same afternoon, Adrienne received a different kind of envelope. The corporate restructuring memo announced immediate organizational changes in response to recent leadership transition. Careful corporate language for Victor Ashford's spectacular fall. Her position was being eliminated. She was offered a lateral transfer to their Covington satellite office, 40 minutes outside Atlanta, at a 20% reduced salary. The HR director delivered this news with practiced neutrality. "We need your decision by Friday," she said, sliding the transfer paperwork across the desk. Adrienne stared at the salary figure, mentally calculating rent possibilities in Covington. The number wouldn't support anything close to her extended stay hotel. She signed the papers without negotiating. Victor's implosion continued with mechanical precision. The State Real Estate Licensing Board concluded their investigation and formally suspended his license for 12 months, citing ethical violations and financial impropriety. His firm issued a press release announcing their mutual separation from Victor, emphasizing their commitment to professional conduct and regulatory compliance. His wife's divorce attorney proved ruthlessly effective. She successfully argued that Victor's undisclosed LLC and concealed commission structure constituted deliberate financial deception during the marriage. The judge agreed. The settlement stripped Victor of multiple properties, including the downtown condo where Adrienne had briefly lived. He was left with a fraction of his apparent wealth. The leverage that had sustained his carefully constructed image collapsed like a house of cards. Adrienne found a one-bedroom apartment in Covington, in a tired complex with a cracked tennis court and a pool that hadn't been opened in 2 seasons. The rent consumed nearly half her reduced salary. She boxed up her designer clothes, bought during the Victor months, and stored them in her mother's garage. They belonged to a life that no longer existed. The social circles Victor had promised access to closed ranks immediately. The dinner invitations stopped. The charity board consideration evaporated. The introductions to people she should know never materialized. She was quietly removed from 3 group texts and unfollowed by several wives of Victor's former colleagues. Patricia called Jerome on a Sunday morning, about a week after Adrienne's move to Covington. The conversation was brief, but warm. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for handling everything the way you did." "Nothing to thank me for," Jerome replied. "You did the right thing, too." "I hope you find peace in all this," Patricia said softly. Jerome looked out his kitchen window at the garden bed he'd just finished building. "I already have it," he said. They ended the call with genuine goodwill. That evening, Gloria hosted dinner at her house. Nothing fancy, just family and real friends. Jerome manned the grill, seasoning chicken and vegetables with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Neil nursed a single beer, talking shop with Deshawn about a security system upgrade for Butler Electric's new office space. Gloria moved through her kitchen with quiet efficiency, batting away offers of help with a wave of her wooden spoon. Nobody gave speeches. Nobody needed to. The conversation flowed naturally. Work stories, neighborhood gossip, Deshawn's wedding plans, the Braves' pitching rotation. Plates were filled and refilled. Laughter came easily. These were people who had known Jerome before, during, and after, who had watched him handle everything with a dignity that required no audience. Gloria's banana pudding appeared for dessert, served in the blue glass bowls she'd owned since Jerome was a boy. The familiar taste carried him back to countless Sunday dinners, to the foundation his mother had built through quiet consistency and unflinching love. As the evening wound down, Jerome hugged his mother goodbye. She held him a moment longer than usual, saying nothing. She didn't need to. Her pride in the man he'd proven to be, again, was evident in her eyes. The night air was soft as Jerome drove home, windows down, Atlanta's lights painting the sky in distant orange. He turned onto his street, the familiar curve of it settling something in his chest. The house came into view. His house, fully and finally his. The new garden bed was a darker shadow against the lawn. The navy blue front door he'd repainted gleamed under the porch light he'd wired himself. He pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment, engine off, looking at the home he'd built and kept. Through everything, he had remained exactly who he was. That was its own victory. The morning sun hadn't yet cleared the horizon when Jerome's eyes opened at 5:15 a.m. 14 months had passed since the divorce was finalized, but his internal clock remained as precise as ever. He moved through his morning routine with practiced efficiency. Fresh clothes laid out, coffee measured exactly, the quiet house holding the rhythm of his footsteps. The Stonecrest neighborhood was still sleeping as Jerome carried his coffee onto the back deck. The wooden boards beneath his feet were solid. He'd replaced 3 of them last weekend, not because they were failing, but because he believed in maintaining things before they broke. The morning air carried the scent of his neighbor's jasmine and the distant sound of early commuter traffic. Butler Electric's growth had exceeded even his careful projections. The Decatur mixed-use development, completed 2 months ahead of schedule and $50,000 under budget, had opened doors Jerome knew were there, but had waited patiently to walk through. 2 major referrals followed, a retail complex renovation and a medical office building that required specialized electrical systems. Both clients specifically requested Butler Electric based on the Decatur project's reputation. Jerome sipped his coffee, watching a cardinal land on the raised garden bed he'd built in the spring. The tomatoes were coming in strong, and the herbs Felicia had suggested were thriving. He smiled, thinking about her practical approach. She'd researched companion planting and drawn him a diagram, the same methodical attention she brought to her high school chemistry lessons. Inside his office, the morning's priorities waited in neat stacks. The school district bid documents required final review before submission, the largest potential contract in Butler Electric's history. The scope would require adding 2 journeyman electricians to the crew and finally hiring the full-time office manager he'd been considering. Growth, but controlled growth, built on foundation, not leverage. The house around him had transformed quietly but completely over the past year. The navy blue front door made the brick exterior pop exactly as he'd envisioned. The garage workspace gleamed with completed projects, including the custom storage system he'd designed and installed over several weekends. Every corner reflected intentional care, the kind that came from knowing exactly what you wanted and being patient enough to build it right. Felicia understood that patience. They'd met through Deshawn's wife. They taught at the same school, but neither had rushed into anything. Their first date was coffee that stretched into lunch because the conversation flowed easily. She asked thoughtful questions about electrical work, genuinely curious about the engineering aspects. He found himself drawing diagrams on napkins, explaining load calculations, and she followed every detail. Their relationship developed with the same careful attention. Dinner dates became weekend projects, became comfortable routines. She had her own life, her own passion for teaching, and her own definition of success that had nothing to do with status or appearance. When she laughed, it was genuine. When she spoke, it was direct. Everything about her felt like truth. Deshawn's spring wedding had been a celebration of that kind of truth. Jerome stood beside his oldest friend as best man, watching him marry a woman who loved him exactly as he was. When it came time for the toast, Jerome spoke from that same place of authenticity. Showing up for someone, he'd said, looking at the newlyweds, means seeing them completely and choosing them daily. It means building something real together, brick by brick, day by day. It means understanding that love isn't a feeling you fall into. It's a commitment you rise to every morning with your whole heart. The reception hall had gone quiet. Deshawn had hugged him hard enough to crack ribs. Adrienne crossed Jerome's mind occasionally, but without rancor. She was a closed chapter in a book he'd finished reading. He heard through business circles that she was still at the Covington office, still in the same apartment complex. The life she'd imagined with Victor had evaporated like morning dew, leaving behind only what was real. He wished her neither harm nor particular happiness. She simply was not part of his story anymore. The envelope in his mailbox that morning had no return address, but he recognized Patricia Cole's distinctive handwriting immediately. Inside was a simple white card containing 4 words: "You deserved better. P." Jerome read it once, appreciating its simple honesty. He tucked it carefully into his wallet, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as recognition of his own worth, something he'd never actually misplaced. Moving back to the kitchen, he refilled his coffee and turned his attention to the school district bid documents spread across the table. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.